Hello, developers. Take a look at me. Now look at your code. Now back to me. Sadly, I didn't write your code, but I can teach you how to code like me in Cloud Firestore. I'm on a Pikachu. As you may remember from 2 weeks ago, we were working on this project here where we've got a basic login and we log in with Firestore and it gives us back the document for the currently logged in user. And we can test this out by just jumping into our database tab here, and we can see that under our database we have a users collection, and under each user we have the email, new user, and old user. So today let's get more into the Firebase methods and the service wrapper that we made, and let's go ahead and write a simple to-do list application, and that way we can kind of see all of the rest of the things we can do with Firestore, and this should get you guys well on your way. So let's go ahead and start by, let's make an Ion card, and let's use an Emmet. So let's use an Ion card. It's going to have an Ion list inside of it, and then it's going to have an Ion item. And then we can click enter and boom, there we go. We got some nice code going on. So now each one of these items is going to be the to-do. But we're going to use a couple things. Let's go ahead and put an Ion icon on the left side. Let's go ahead and give it a name of checkmark circle. And then we're going to give it a slot equal to start so that it aligns to the left. Then we're going to give a simple div here, and then we can put our to-do right here, and that should be in the middle. And then we want another Ion icon, name of trash can. Let's see if that one exists. And we're going to do slot of n so that it aligns over to the right. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like first off. Okay, so there you go. We've got a nice little checkbox over here. We've got our to-do, and then we don't have a trash can. Let's look up our Ionicons and let's see. It might just be trash. It is trash. Okay, so trash. There we go. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna create a simple form that we're gonna submit. It's gonna add a to-do onto our to-do list here, and then we're gonna be able to click the checkbox to mark it as completed, and then we're going to be able to click the delete button over here in order to delete the to-do. So simple enough. So let's go ahead and make down here another Ion card. And actually let's do this. Let's do a form, form with an Ion card in it. And then inside of there is going to be an Ion list, and then an Ion item. And then inside of the Ion item is going to be an Ion input. Yeah, so let's do that. And we don't need an action on our form. I will give it an ID of to-do form. And then we will give it a name. Set to the same thing, to-do, Toto form, to-do form. Okay. Okay, so, cool. So now we've got an input here. So now we probably want a button, right, to submit this guy. So let's go ahead and do an Ion button with a type of submit. And there we go. And when you see, say, save. And I think that should about it. Let's go ahead and give this guy a name as to do. And yeah, let's just see what that guy looks like. Okay, let's give it a placeholder. Okay, so now we've got an input here that says, what do you want to accomplish? And then we can type into this guy. And if in theory we had this hooked up, we could click save and it would add it to our list of to-dos. So let's go ahead and set that up now. Okay, so first off, we're going to want to do some binding. So let's go ahead and make an on submit on our form so we can catch when this form submits. And we're going to want to submit the event through. So we say on submit event, and then we want to say add this dot add to do. And then we're going to pass in the event. And then up here, let's make our method. So we're going to do add, it's going to be async as well. Add to do. And we're going to take into account the event. Let's go ahead and event.prevent default. So that's going to stop the form from refreshing the page. So where you saw before, when we click save, how it refreshed the page, it's going to stop that from happening. So anytime you're using event.prevent default on any event, it's going to stop the default functionality of what that thing should do. So in this case, the browser wants to submit it to a web page, and see, as you can see here, there it's trying to do that. But we're going to prevent that default so that we don't get that functionality, because we're going to write our own. Cool, so we're going to go back here, and again, now when you click save, it doesn't refresh. Perfect. And then the next thing we're going to do is let's go ahead and wire this input up to our state. And generally how I like to do this, if we're using Ion inputs, they have a really simple event that gets broadcast. And it's a simple way of us grabbing a lot of different fields and information and then saving them as form data. And we use this same trick when we did auth, so we're going to do that again. So we're going to do state form data, and form data is going to have, actually let's just set it by default, and that way our typings will figure it out auto-magically. We're going to say to do is going to be an empty string. And then down here, in our form, let's go ahead and bind this value to this .formData.todo. Cool, so now we should get a blank box here. And we're not gonna have, we need to now get, so now we've got the value setting from the state to the input. Now we need to get the value from the input set to the state. So we can do that with a listener. So let's go ahead and do listen. And then we're going to set up a listener here at the top of our page. So let's listen. We're going to listen for Ion input. And we're going to say on Ion input. Cool. And we're going to get the event detail from this event. And then what we want to do is we want to say this.formData. And then we can get the event target name equals event.target.value. And just to make sure here, we can do a little check to make sure that we have both event.target.name and event.target.value. And just to be super paranoid, I'm going to also check for event and event.target. So just to make sure all of that stuff is defined before it tries to update the state. And then, of course, this is going to update our state, but we won't see that update. It won't fire a render. And in this case, that's not a bad thing, because we don't need to fire a render whenever they're typing into the field. We need to fire a render after they click submit or something like that. So let's go ahead and see this in action. So down here in our add to do, let's just console log our this.form data. And then after it's done, we want to clear the form, right? So we can then set this back. So we'll say this.form data equals to do, and that's going to be an empty string. So cool, so there we go. So now we should have simple functionality here. We type something in, testing, quick click save, it clears the field, and we can see there's our to-do logged in the console. So cool. So now what we need to do is talk to Firebase. So let's go ahead and jump right into that. So let's go ahead and say let's await this.db collection. So let's go ahead and get the users collection. And then we're going to say document or doc. And then we're going to use the doc for the current user again. So we're going to say result. We can say session. So we can say this dot session dot, and then let's go ahead and get the UID, or user ID. So now we've selected with this. This is going to get us the current user's user document again. And if you don't remember that, check out our last video where we set up this Firestore stuff. Link in the description. Cool. So now we've got that document. Now we're going to make a sub collection. So each document can store collections underneath it. And you can actually see the option here for adding a collection. So that's what we're going to do because we want each user to have their own set of to-dos. And in the past, they actually didn't have a way for us to query for documents documents inside of a sub collection. But actually Google I/O just wrapped up here a couple days ago. And one of the big announcements that they had for Firestore was the fact that now they actually do have the ability to query sub collections. So this becomes the best kind of way to store this type of data where you have lists of things underneath each specific person. Because the way used to be preferable was to store these things under a root collection and then kind of reference them from the user's document or whatever document you're on. But now we have this nice new way to query subcollections, so we can do this in a more kind of intuitive way. So to do that, it's really simple. So like you're in a collection, you get a document, and that document can have a collection, and so on and so forth. That can go on infinitely. So we can say doc, this user session ID, then we can say collection again, and now we can select the to-dos collection, and then we can say add. So now we're going to be adding a to-do onto that selection. And in this case, we're going to do this before we reset our form data, and we're just going to pass through the form data because we want to add that form data, this.form data. Okay, so if this went well, so let's go ahead and save this. So we'll say add to-do result. Okay, so we've got add to-do result, and let's just console log that guy out. Console log add to-do result. Okay, so let's console log that out, and we should be able to see it actually as well. So now if I go ahead and type in testing 1 2 3 and click save, that's going to, boom, there you can see it took it a second now. It had to go out to the database, take that form data, save it there, and now you can see here's our reference to the document that was just created. So now we get this information. We can get the ID from the document. So you see L49 or 149. And now if we jump back over into our database here, we can refresh because again, remember from our last video, your collections, new collections aren't going to be seen automatically. So you will have to refresh to see that kind of stuff. But there you go. So now we can see here's my user document and here's the to-dos under my user. And now I can click into that and there's my to-do. So we're set up as far as that goes. So now we've got a document that exists with a to-do in it. Let's go ahead and put that to-do on our page here. Let's list these things out, right? Because that's what we're doing here. So to do that, let's make a method here to get our to-dos. So we're going to paste this guy in here. And what we're going to do is create a new state item. So let's say state my to-dos equals, and then for right now, we're just going to say any. It's going to be any array, and then we're going to set it equal to an empty array so that we don't end up having it fail out when we try to loop over the collection or the to-dos. So, and then you can see this to-dos. What we're doing here is we just want to await db collection users document the currently logged in user, the collection for that user, the to-dos, and then we get them. So that will get us the reference to the collection, or that'll get us the collection back of documents of to-dos. And then you can see here we do a quick check to say, hey, is the reference or is the to-do list empty? If so, set it equal to an empty array. If it's not empty, set it equal to the docs. So the actual my to-dos here is going to have a list of documents under it, and those are going to hold the actual data. So we can do a little bit better about our typings here, because if you look at this, you can see that this hands us back a query snapshot. And so let's go ahead and just console log our my to-dos reference so we can see this in action. And actually we will need to hook this guy up, right? So we need to have this fire whenever the page loads. So let's do an async component did load. And this is going to fire when the component loads. So we're going to say this dot get to-dos, and we're going to await that. Okay, and then what we're going to see right off the bat it works this time. Like, so we can see there's our query snapshot. But when we reload our page, we're going to get an error. It's going to say cannot read property UID of undefined. And a little pro tip, if you're not very familiar with JavaScript or you're still getting started, anytime you see this cannot read property of blah of undefined, that means that you've tried to use something, so in this case UID, and this guy, the guy directly preceding it, is undefined. So you can't tunnel down into an object or something that doesn't exist. So an easy fix for this is just around our get to-dos, let's just check to see if there is a session. So we're going to check to see if there's a session. And then now, this time when we refresh, it's going to check, see that there's no session, and then it's going to basically not run. And you might be wondering, why is there no session, right? I thought in the last video we set up the session, we passed that down. Well, that's because in our app root, which I've made a couple small tweaks to make it a little bit cleaner, is you can see here when the component like before it loads, like right when it gets initialized, we create the auth service and the database service. The session, though, doesn't get set until after the component did load, and then we get the auth state changed fired from Firebase. And so because of that, session isn't set. And then what's going to happen here is when our application loads, it's going to feed in the default props without the session. That's going to cause this thing to say, hey, there is no session. And then instantly after we reinitialize our default props here, that's going to then pass into our component props here. And then the Ion route is going to then re-render that component from scratch. So we're going to actually have this component did load fire again once the session is available. And so then we'll be able to actually run this guy. And you can see there's our result here. And so just like you can see here, we've got an empty. So this tells us true or false, like is the collection empty? If it is empty, then we're going to set it equal to an empty array, or we're going to set it equal to docs. And you can see here, if we click into this array, the docs are just an array of query document snapshots. So to make our typings better, let's go up here where we have the my to-dos. And instead of saying any, we can say Firebase dot Firestore dot, and then we can use this typing here, query document snapshot. Boom, there we go. So now we should get some typings in order to help us autocomplete here. So cool, so now we've got our list of to-dos, right? And we've saved it to a state item called my to-dos. So let's go ahead and now down here in our view, let's go ahead and write a loop that's going to loop through those to-dos and show them in our to-do list. So to do that, let's go ahead and right here, we're going to do a simple ES6 map. So we're going to say this.mytodos.map. And if you didn't set the mytodos to an empty array up here like we did, if you didn't do that, then what's going to happen is this is going to error out when it renders. And render errors are a little tricky to debug because, again, it's like rendering this lump. So it's going to error out and say, hey, there's no to-dos. So always make sure that when you're doing a loop on something that you make sure that you're setting it equal to an empty array, so that very worst case scenario, it's just going to hit that and not loop, and then it just won't show. Okay, so each one of these is going to be the to-do document. And then in this case, we usually use a set of curlies, right, to do like a map function. But in this case, remember, we're inside of a return. So we're already returning back a lump of HTML in this case. So we just want to return back automatically. And so if you run the map method and you don't put those curlies there, it's going to auto return. So there's a little pro tip for you. So now we're going to put our Ion item that we made inside of our loop here. And then what we can do is, let's tab this out one more time. And then what we can do is now we can access this to-do, and that to-do is going to have all of our data. So if we wanted to, let's go ahead and right here in our to-do, let's go ahead and put the to-do dot. And then once you do the dot, you can see because we used our typings up here, it knows to autocomplete for us about what we have in this. So now we can see to-do dot ID, and we're going to put a dash, and then we're going to say to-do dot data, and data in this case is a method. And the data method returns us back the current value of the data from the document. So in this case, now we can access this document data. In this case, it's going to hand us back an object with to-do. So we can say to-do data dot to-do. And again, if you had any other values here, you know, maybe a created at date or something like that, you could put all those things in this document when it's created, and then you can reference that with to-do dot data dot to-do dot created at, etc., etc., etc. Okay, cool. So now we should have there's our to-do. So now we can see there's the document ID, and there is our testing 1, 2, 3. That's the document that we have here. So now we've got the document rendering up here, but what we're gonna see is if I add a new one and I save, that is not gonna show. So we are querying, remember, when document did load or when component did load. And so we're not gonna see these changes once they happen. And so the reason why, and you might have asked yourself, why did you just not write this get to do stuff inside of the component did load? And that's because we want to be able to run this thing whenever we need to. So now we can up here, let's go ahead and after we add our to do here and we get our result back, let's go ahead and run await this dot get to dos. Let's run that get to dos again. And that way, let's just add it. Yeah, we actually don't even need this reference, to be honest. So let's go ahead and just get rid of that. And we'll get rid of that console log. Okay, so now once we add our to-do, and you can see there that fired the component did load as soon as we saved. But now you can see when I add another and I click save, it's going to then get that query and post that out. But, and I hear some of you saying, Firestore is live syncing. So like, why are we gonna do a query every single time? Is there a better way to do this? And you, my astute friend, are correct. So what we can do is we can set a watcher up and we can watch the data. And then when something changes, we can then act on that. And so that's what we're gonna set up here. So let's do inside of this get to do. So we don't need to get the to-dos whenever we add a to-do anymore because it's gonna automatically figure that stuff out. So what we're going to do is we're going to this collection here. So when we run this .get or whatever, instead of running .get, we want to run a watch. And so what we can do is we can run .onSnapshot. And so onSnapshot is going to basically run the, it's going to run every time something changes inside of the data. And if you want, there's a link in the description on this page. But here you can see this is kind of what we're doing. So you can see it's on snapshot, it gives us back a snapshot, and then we can also pass in an error. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna run this guy. We don't need to await anymore. And we're not going to use this, this right here, this get to dos. Now let's go ahead and say, whoops. On snapshot, and I'll go ahead and close our root now, so we're done with that. So you can see it's got on snapshot, and we've got the snapshot. So let's go ahead and console.log our snapshot. And here you can see the first method that you pass in, or the first parameter that you pass in is going to be what happens every time it successfully gets a new snapshot. And then the second is going to be an error. So if anything errors out, you can interact with your errors. In this case, I'm just going to console log the error. But again, do better error handling, and you will be a happy camper. Cool. So now we've got this DB collection, users, doc, blah, 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 on snapshot. So now if we go back into our browser, we should be able to see, and let's reload just so we can make sure we get the freshest version. So you can see we're getting the same results. So we have the docs and then we have empty of false. So we can do exactly what we did before. So we can say this dot my to-dos equals snapshot dot empty. If it's empty, let's set it equal to an empty array. Otherwise, let's set it equal to snapshot dot docs. And there we go. So now this should give us the same result. Boom, there we go. We've got our documents, except this time, now when I type in and save a new one, it's automatically going to fire this watcher, and then it's going to update our state, and then that's going to fire the render. And that's because, again, remember, we're setting this value over. We're reinitializing my to-dos, and that will fire a render, and that will cause it to automatically show. And you can see it's a little snappier. It's a little bit more responsive because now Firebase has a pipe between your client's device and the database. And so instantly when something happens, it fires it down. You're not waiting for you to get the success back from Firestore and then hand back off to the server and get your new version of the code. It's just automatically happening and piped to you as it happens. However, what we will have now is this DB collection thing, right? This snapshot is continually running. And so what will happen is that if you don't unbind these guys, then you basically could leave this guy up and running. So if your user jumps between, because remember this runs on component did load, so if your user jumps between multiple pages, it could start a bunch of these listeners, and remember you get charged based on the number of reads and writes that you have. So this could have a lot of stuff just open and running in the background and syncing down data when they're not even on the page and viewing it. So you'll always want to make sure that you detach these listeners, and luckily they give us a nice method to do that via Firestore, and we have a nice way that we can do that inside of a stencil. So to do that, let's go ahead and, as you can see here, we need to save the reference for the snapshot to something that we can access. So let's go ahead and save that guy. And we don't need it on state because we don't really want it to fire a render. So we can just do, let's say, let's say to do, this is going to be our to-do subscription. So our to-do subscription, and we can actually, let's just say any for right this second. Oops, any. And then let's use our, as we did in the last video, let's use our thing here. So we can actually hover, and you can see that when we run this, it returns us a void. There you go. It's not, we're not going to have anything we can necessarily do. So it's just going to return void. So any is just going to have to do in this case. But it's super simple. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say add to, not add to, this here in our get to do's, we're going to say this dot to do subscription equals, and then we're going to set it equal to the result. And so this, once it's done, it's going to hand us back the reference basically to the subscription. And then what we can do is we can set up another component lifecycle method here called component did unload. And this guy fires when the component is removed from the DOM. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say that same thing. Let's do a session check, this dot session, and let's go ahead and check, well, even smarter, let's just check to see if to-do subscription exists. And if to-do subscription exists, we're going to do this dot to-do subscription, and boom. And all we got to do is call it because it's going to be an actual function. So we're just going to call that, and then that should close this connection to Firestore. And there we have it. So now we've got something that we can view our to-dos. We've got a thing where we can add a new to-do, and we stop our listener once we leave the page, which is super important. So now let's hook up this delete and this checkbox so we can do edit and delete, and then we'll kind of wrap it up for there. So cool. So let's go ahead and make our method to delete a to-do. So let's say async delete to do, and we're going to pass through the ID, or actually no, even better, let's pass through the reference. So this is going to be the Firebase Firestore document reference. So we're going to pass through the document reference, and then we're going to use that in order to delete our to do. So go ahead and go down here, and we need to link our trash button to this delete. So we're going to say on click, and we're going to do we don't need to pass through the event in this case. So let's just say this dot delete to do bind. Actually no, we'll use the standard way. So we'll just do a fat arrow function here. And we'll delete to do, and we want to pass through, remember, the to do dot ref, and that's going to be the document reference, right? So again, like I said earlier, when you're pulling down this list of to-dos, it's not just going to pull you down the data for each one of those documents. It gives you the reference to the document, the ID, and all these different things, so that we don't just have the data, we have some other things, so we can do cool stuff like this, where we're deleting the to-do, and then we're passing through this reference, and then now up here in our delete to-do, now we can say ref dot, and then you can see there's our delete method, boom, and we will await that to occur. And just to be safe, right, we don't want to necessarily just delete to-dos willy-nilly, so let's just throw a quick confirm around this guy. So we'll say if confirm, are you sure you wish to delete this to-do? And then if they confirm it, then it will run this guy, and we should then get, again, our watcher is going to then fire, our subscription is going to fire, and then it's going to reset the value of our to-dos, which will fire render, and we will see the changes. So let's go ahead and see this through. Okay, so now here's our list of to-dos. I click on delete. It asks me if I'd like to. I click OK, and it's gone. Boom. If I click cancel, it's not gone because it doesn't run that piece. Okay, so now we've got the delete functionality. Let's go ahead and wire it up so that we can mark these guys as done or as checked off. And we can even add a little bit of styling on these guys to let us know when they're checked off. First off, let's first off just go ahead and create our method. So let's do another onClick here. So we'll say onClick equals fat arrow function, this dot check off to do. Yeah. Check off to do. Let's just say finish to do. I like that better. Okay, so finish to do. And then we're gonna, again, let's just pass through the reference so that we can manipulate it from there. So then up here, let's make our new method, async finish to do. It's going to be passing us through a reference, which is going to be a Firebase Firestore document reference. And in here, we don't need to really do any kind of confirmation or anything. We're just going to do ref.update because we're updating this. We're not going to do a set because set will actually like reset our document from scratch. Update will merge whatever we pass in with what already currently exists. And if you define any value, so if we were to define to do in this case, it would overwrite our to do in that collection, in that document. Okay, so we're going to update and we're going to say completed equals true. Or, well, let's stay consistent here. Finished is true. Cool, so that's going to fire and update that document. And again, our watcher will fire, or our subscription will fire, and then it will update and then it will fire a render. Cool, so now let's do something so that we can visually tell these guys apart, right? So maybe something as simple as adding a strike through on this div. So what we can do is let's go ahead and on this div, let's say class equals, and then what we can do is we can say, okay, if to do dot data dot finished, if it's finished, then we will add a class of finished. Otherwise, we will just set it equal to blank, an empty string, in which case it will have no class. Just like me, no class. I did open this video shirtless, so yeah, no class. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is let's go ahead and go into our app home.css, and let's go ahead and write this finished rule. So let's do finished, and finished, we're just gonna say text decoration, strike through, is it? Oh, goodness. Text transform. Oh, God, I can't remember how to strike through text. I knew it, I was right. Damn you. Okay, so we just want to do line through. So we're going to do text decoration, line through. Okay, so now if it's finished, it's going to apply a class, and then that class is going to strike through that particular item. So let's go ahead and refresh here, and let's go ahead and click on our checkbox. Oh, there we go. So what happens when I click on this again? It's still checked off, Bobby. It's still checked off. Maybe I wanted to uncheck. So if we wanted to do that, let's go ahead and just do a quick check. So let's pun. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a quick check. See, like uncheck that guy. So what we can do is let's say is finished. And we're going to change this actually now to toggle to do. So let's say toggle to do is finished is going to equal either true or false. So it's going to be a Boolean. And then we're going to set finished. Actually, no, let's just do finished. Let's make it really simple ourselves. So if we don't define the key for a value inside of an object, it's just going to assume that that is the name of the thing. And that's what I always try to do. I try to, if at all possible, so that I don't have to do something like this, if at all possible, I'll try to clean up my variables and make it as clean as possible. Cool, so now here you can see we need to change this method name to toggle to do. And then we want to pass in the opposite of what the value currently is, right? So we're going to do to-do.data.finished, and then we're going to do a exclamation point right before it. And that says in JavaScript, do the opposite. So flip whatever this is to the opposite. So if it's true, it'll become false. If it's anything falsy, it will become true. And so that should give us the desired result. So let's save it. And then now, unchecking, checking. Booyah. And obviously this is a really, really raw demo, and there's not a whole lot going on here, but this should give you enough to kind of go on to start setting up Firestore inside of your applications.
Swan dive into the best code of your life with a subscription to that channel you liked and shared.